Hi guys, great to be with you again. My name is Michael Millerman, millermanschool.com. And today I wanted just to think out loud with you about the topic of madness and music in a way. Okay, so what is the nature of the inspiration that the musician gets when he's out of his mind? Now, I don't mean kind of demonic possession where you might think that you're embedding satanic messages in the records if you play them backwards. I think there was some sort of rumor like that about the Beatles records, that they had satanic messages, and Rolling Stones maybe too. You know, if you played them backwards, you'd be getting hypnotized, or subliminal messaging. That's not really what I mean. What I mean is, where in the case of songwriters do songs come from when the songwriters themselves say that the process is mysterious, that the song like falls out of the sky, something that Noel Gallagher, the great Oasis songwriter, has said, or that they come like a ghost brings you the song, like Bob Dylan has said, or who knows the other ways in which these songs can be said to just appear out of nowhere, whether it's a spark of inspiration that you can't account for because somehow it's not within the realm of your human making, which is a weird thing because the songwriter is the music maker. Yeah, he's melody, lyrics, composition, structure, the idea of the song. You might think the songwriter made it, the songwriter did it, the songwriter wrote it. And yet, in some of the best cases of songwriting, like I say, whether you take Paul Simon or Bob Dylan or Noel Gallagher, they all credit some other sort of mysterious force. So I'm pretty interested in that phenomenon. And I wrote about it today on my Substack. And then shortly thereafter, I saw that somebody else had published a nice piece that sort of is more general than just songwriting. It takes on this topic of visionary artists. And it's not really just the divine inspiration side. It's the question, are they mentally ill? Okay, what's with the visions? What's with the voices? What's with the strange encounters and dreams? So I thought we could read this over together. Are visionary artists just mentally ill? Before we turn to that, a band I used to like back in the day, when you could say music was more important to me then than it is now, but it's still important to me now. But one of the bands I used to listen to is called the Brian Jonestown Massacre. They have an album called Thank God for Mental Illness. And, that album title has always sort of connected these things for me. Thank God for mental illness. Not in the sense that you want to go crazy and stab your neighbor. God forbid. That's not the kind of mental illness that you're thanking God for. But thank God for that kind of visionary insanity, for the Dionysian, liminal, transcendent possession that as an artist or a musician, you can experience or undergo. Thank God for that mental illness that is prophetic, not demonic. So this idea, and it's funny because when I published my Substack, I used, an image of Paul Simon, an image of Bob Dylan, an image of Noel Gallagher, an image of myself, not to put myself in their company. Okay, there was another reason for that. And then this album, Thank God for Mental Illness. And then, like I said, this popped up in my inbox 5 minutes later. Are visionary artists just mentally ill? So let's go over it. Let's see what it has to say. And let's think about this phenomenon together. Because after all, it's attested to not only in these contemporary forms that I mentioned, songwriters and others, it's also attested to, for example, in the problem of the founder of a company. I'll show you this. I have it queued up. Peter Thiel talks about it in his book, 0 to 1, the founder's paradox, that the people who found companies, they have to be eccentric, but that their eccentricity can also lead to their destruction in some sense. And he goes over this, and he's got his examples of it, and he shows, they have to be different, they develop extreme traits, and so on. And some of these founders, they can go crazy. They can become undermined. So if Elvis, Michael Jackson, Britney Spears. So a path to immortality, perhaps the only way to be a rock god forever is to die an early death. Okay, Jim Morrison, Kurt Cobain. So I only point this out to show you that even in the context of somebody like Peter Thiel in a book like 0 to 1, this problem of visionary artists, which the founder, the entrepreneur, is his own sort of visionary artist, and mental illness, or again, a certain sort of prophetic insanity, On one hand, it's the thing that makes you what you are. On the other hand, it can also be the cause of your downfall. So it's an extremely interesting phenomenon in and of its own, on its own terms and in its own right. So let's just see, what does Ted, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, okay, Gioia, sorry. We'll just call him Ted the Honest Broker, Gioia, what he has to say on this topic. It's risky to be a visionary. Poet William Blake had his first vision at age 4, but telling others about it was dangerous. At age 8, Blake narrowly avoided a beating from his father, saved only by his mother's intervention, when the child described a tree he had seen that glistened from every branch. It was like the sky filled with starlight, but during the middle of the day. He told his parents that the tree was shining with the light of angels' wings. This was a key moment in Blake's discovery of his vocation as a prophetic poet. Years later, he wrote in his Proverbs of Hell, "A fool sees not the same tree that a wise man sees. He whose face gives no light shall never become a star." You might be surprised, Ted the Honest Broker continues, how common this experience is. Annie Dillard describes an ecstatic experience involving a shining tree in her book, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. Marcel Proust also had a momentous encounter with trees viewed from a carriage window. He writes, suddenly I was overwhelmed with that profound happiness. And as the carriage moves on, he falls into depression, fearing that he has left something essential behind. The Persian ruler Xerxes had such a soul-stirring glimpse of a shining tree while marching through Asia that he adorned it with gold and jewels. Before he moved on, he put a guard on duty to protect that tree forever. And then there are those even more famous people who had life-changing interactions with trees, Buddha, Eve, Newton, Moses, etc. I can only scratch the surface of this rich topic here. I will need to write an essay on this someday. I'll call it How to See a Tree. Blake didn't always avoid beatings, both physically and metaphorically, for his tree visions. His mother lost her patience and hit the future prophetic poet when, on another occasion, the youngster claimed to have encountered the prophet Ezekiel under a different tree in the fields. If Blake had been born 200 years earlier, he would have been celebrated as a seer or saint or shaman. If he were born 200 years later, he would have been prescribed drugs to treat his schizophrenia. You need to recall that Blake grew up during the Enlightenment, also called the Age of Reason. At the very moment when Blake had his dangerous vision of the tree, Immanuel Kant, the rigorous philosopher famous for his critique of pure reason, was writing a savage attack on mystics who claimed wisdom could come via visions and dreams. Blake mostly kept quiet about his visions or turned them into art, but he never distrusted them, and his prophetic poetry and illustrations are still admired today, when we are even more hard-headed and rationalistic than during the Age of Reason. Now, I want to pause here for a minute. Okay, we've set the scene here, or Ted has set the scene for us with the story of Blake's ecstatic tree vision, and with the other examples of people who have beheld the tree, whether it's Moses in the burning bush or the others that were there mentioned. But there's a general topic here that I just want to comment on briefly. You know, in political philosophy, which is what this channel is mostly about, the generator of prophetic imagery is an extremely important figure. I just finished reading a book. I can't show it to you because it's in the other room. It's called Strauss, Plato, and Nietzsche, which covers these three authors, Leo Strauss, Plato, and Nietzsche. And one of the key points of the book is that philosophy as beholding the truth, okay, philosophy as an act of beholding, of vision, of contemplation, you could say, okay, it gives birth to or generates an image, what Nietzsche called an image of existence, what other thinkers have called something else, and what this author, the author of this book, Lawrence Lampert, calls philosophical poetry. So you have the act of seeing and beholding, and then you have the giving birth to or begetting of an image of philosophical poetry. And the idea is that these two things go together, so that in some sense, every true philosopher is also a poet, a prophet, an image maker. He doesn't only have insight into the truth. Together with that insight into the truth, he gives birth to images that are meant to convey something about the truth. So in the case of Nietzsche, it's the will to power is the essential insight into the nature of reality. And then the teaching on the eternal return is the philosophical poetry. As to are Nietzsche's new gods, Dionysus and Ariadne. Not new, they're classical, but they're new, newly established, newly asserted, newly affirmed, and newly posited as the highest gods in Nietzsche's philosophic poetry. So too in Maimonides, medieval Jewish thinker, when he discusses prophecy, he says prophecy is the perfection of two faculties, the faculty of the intellect, which can receive, as it were, the truth, and the faculty of the imagination, which, when it receives from the intellect, it gives what's grasped through pure intellection form, shape, and image that can then be conveyed in a prophetic mode to the many. So the many cannot receive pure intellection, but they can receive pure intellection in the form of an image. So imagery always goes together with prophecy, and philosophic poetry always goes together with philosophy. And then somehow this reflection on inspired seeing, visionary perception, okay, the world illuminated from within, it becomes legitimated within the field of political philosophy. Not only there, obviously it has a separate, it exists separately in the world of mysticism, independently somehow of political philosophy. But, in this channel, I like to bring mysticism and political philosophy together. So mystics have always claimed to have some deeper perception, deeper insight. They could see things from within. They could see the invisible. The invisible becomes for them a something perceptible, which is incredible. Perceptible sometimes maybe through the fleshly eyes, maybe through the inner eye, maybe through the heart, maybe through the third eye, maybe through some other faculty of some other intuitive faculty. Okay, but this is a well-attested to phenomenon. Okay, the mystics among you may have had something like this yourselves, something that would allow you to write the following lines. I'll spare you the lines. Blake mostly kept quiet about his visions or turned them into art, but he never distrusted them, and his prophetic poetry and illustrations are still admired today when we're even more hard-headed and rationalistic than during the Age of Reason. You might think that poets stopped having visions in the modern age, or at least stopped talking about them, but that's not true. Poet Robert Frost started hearing voices around age 7 and believed he had moments of clairvoyance. But his parents were more tolerant than William Blake's. Frost wasn't beaten or drugged. His mother, who also had similar experiences, told him that a few gifted people were blessed with these rare abilities. To the end of his life, the poet's friend Victor Reichert later related, Robert Frost, believed he could hear voices, real voices. His poems came to him like voices from nowhere. He liked to be alone just to listen, to communicate with the spirit world. A few months later, Daniel Handler, who writes brilliant books for children under the pseudonym Lemony Snicket, shared a gripping and candid account of his haunting visions. They started in dreams, but soon entered his waking life, and they have never gone away. I am not a crazy person, he insists. He doesn't dismiss the medical aspects of his experiences, nor do I, writes the author of this piece, but Handler refuses to live his life as a mentally ill patient. He rarely mentions these visions nowadays. People get unnerved around individuals who talk about hallucinations. I stay quiet and I stay in the world, he explains, and that allows him to lead a full and vital creative life. I've read all 13 volumes of Handler or Snicket's grand work, A Series of Unfortunate Events. The author continues, sharing them with my children when they were growing up, so I know firsthand how extraordinary his level of creativity really is. To write like that is a gift, but perhaps not always pleasant or easy for the gifted. Okay, so he's going to continue in his article for a minute here to talk about visionaries, from what I can see here, about schizophrenia, okay, about all of that, give some examples and some analysis. But, I'd like to know from you, ask yourselves, aren't there artists that you have been drawn to before who are slightly mad, who must be slightly mad to produce the art that they produce? I've had to think about this myself for many years, both because of the artists that I love and because of my own experiences. Would you want a world in which you could dial down the madness, but together with it, you lose the artistry? Or can you find a world in which it's possible to thank God for mental illness because of the beauty that, in the best case, it brings into the world? In recent years, he continues, I've collected accounts of this sort drawn from the lives of creative people who do work that is literally visionary. Call them what you want, schizophrenics or gifted or whatever, but they're far more common than the general public realizes. Consider the case of John Frusciante of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, or science fiction novelist Philip K. Dick, or visual artist Yayoi Kusama, or Buddy Bolden, the first jazz musician. I've written elsewhere about the blues legend Robert Johnson's alleged deal with the devil made at the crossroads at midnight. Many music scholars find the whole story deeply embarrassing, but I've probably done more research on the incident than anybody, and I'm convinced that Johnson himself believed in the reality of his encounter. Okay, that's interesting. So you can watch that separately. I'll do so after shooting this video. Was he crazy? In fact, many artists, as well as others over the centuries, have had similar experiences. I describe some of them in my book in progress, Music to Raise the Dead. You might even say that the story of a personal visit to a dark underworldish realm is the most essential tale in our cultural heritage. It shows up in Homer, Virgil, Dante, the myth of Orpheus, which inspired the birth of opera, by the way, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, Finnegan's Wake, Native American traditional tales, all shamanic cultures, and many other places. I just want to pause here for a minute, okay? We're going to pause on this paragraph because I want to share, especially with those of you who know this channel well and have watched it before, quickly, okay? I'm going to share with you quickly a model from Alexander Dugan that I like on this topic. Whether you like Dugan or hate him, it doesn't really matter, okay? We're interested in the model here. So in his book series Noomachia, which is what I call a philosophical analysis of civilizational multipolarity, okay, 20-something volumes worth. But in the first few methodological volumes, Dugan distinguishes three logoi, he calls them, okay? Three fundamental worldviews, if you want, or three fundamental maps of meaning, to use Jordan Peterson's term, okay? Three lenses through which a person can interpret oneself, the gods, and the world. He calls them the Apollonian, the Dionysian, and the Cybelian, or the light logos, the dark logos, and the black logos, okay? Apollo, Dionysus, Cybele. And this idea of a journey to the underworld, it characterizes Dionysus. Dionysus is the descending and reascending god. It's the worldview that incorporates going underground, going into the underworld, going to the midnight sun, okay? Descent and reascent, that whole world. But Apollo is strictly speaking a solar god, okay? The Apollonian gods do not descend in this model. The Apollonian gods, they live on Mount Olympus, and they're the gods of the heights. They're the gods of the great big sky and the great big sun and of the heights. They don't go down. They don't go to the darkness. They don't transcend the boundary between night and day. They are daytime gods, okay? One of the and Cybele is an underground god. Okay, Cybele is a titanic god. Cybele is the great mother, and there are all kinds of things you could say using this model of Apollo, Dionysus, and Cybele. You could talk about all sorts of things, which is what Dugan does in this book series. And like you talk about gender. Okay, the Apollonian gender dyad, the Dionysian gender dyad, the Cybelian gender dyad, because Cybele had a cult of castration where the men became women. Whereas in the Apollonian model, the women take on the characteristics of men. And in Dionysus, they're more, you could say, there's a different sort of bisexuality to the Dionysian pair. But why I want to mention this is because I think it's helpful in showing us that there are at least two fundamental forms of mysticism. There's the Dionysian mysticism, which descends into the underworld. But there is a certain sort of Apollonian mysticism too, which goes up and up and up and up and up to greater and greater and greater light, like the descent from the bottom of Plato's cave all the way up to the vision of the sun, right? Vertical ascent culminating in a illuminating vision. But then even in that vertical ascent, there's an extra step, which is like the darkness that is above all light. You see this figure in mystical writings all of the time. And in Plato's cave allegory, it's called that which is beyond being. So going from like ignorance to knowledge, or from non-being to being, is more and more and more and more and more light until you get to that which is beyond being, the darkness that is above even the light. Okay, so I just wanted to point out two different mystical topographies, one that includes descent into the darkness, and one for whom the darkness is the highest rung, higher even than the highest light. But okay, that's in passing. But it's important. I think one of the reasons personally I'm attracted to Dugan's writings and to other writings of people who can make these subtle distinctions within the realm of, mystical topographies. Because you might think, Mysticism is just mysticism, but no, you get into these subtleties and you realize just how rich the experiences of the soul can be. Well, all right, let's go back to this. So this narrative is everywhere in our world or outside of the world, as the case may be. But these encounters, these encounters with the dark underworldish realm, these encounters are dismissed as either idle fictions or mental illness, and no place in between these two interpretations is allowed in our discourse. All right, that's changing, I would say. So I'm commenting, right, on that article. That's changing. I think we're experiencing a return of the religious, a return of the mystical, and a return of interest in these topographies. Again, whether you call them mystical topographies or topographies of the soul. You have authors like Henri Corbin, who writes about the imaginary in the thought of Ibn Arabi. So you've got these like return of medieval mysticisms and just incredible things, but you have to be attuned to it to see it. You have to be among the seekers in order to find it. And one of the ways that you can become attuned to it, I think, one of the ways that you can start to seek for it is through articles like this that raise the question of the relationship between the visionary and, and the mentally unwell, let's say, between models of understanding religious experience, mystical experience. So for every artist today who speaks openly about their visions, there are probably far more who keep quiet, fearing that their quote unquote visionary gift will be medicalized, institutionalized, or ridiculed, or perhaps just disappear. That last item on the list, the fear that a creative talent will simply vanish one day, is a real concern for artists. At least it was in earlier times. The muses gave them a gift in secret ways that should not be spoken of. Talking openly about it is sacrilege, so much so that the gift might be taken away in punishment. Think about that. Imagine that you are an artist and that as you create or produce or receive your art, you have a sense that there's a higher power at play, an angel, a messenger, a muse, spirit of God, mysterious being. Maybe you saw it, maybe you heard it, maybe it's tugging on your heartstrings, maybe it's moving your hand. Like Bright Eyes, a band that I like, Bright Eyes, all this automatic writing I have tried to understand from a psychedelic angel that is tugging at my hand. It's an infinite coincidence, but it doesn't form a plan. Nice set of lyrics there, among many others. You have this experience and maybe you even want to tell people, you're not supposed to hide your light under a bushel or whatever. You want to tell people you had a visitation, you had a message, you have some sort of inspiration, but there's the risk. Oh, you do? Well, please let me introduce you to my doctor who will treat you for your schizophrenia. Let me introduce you to this psych ward, which will definitely take care of your auditory hallucinations. Now, in some sense, the proof is in the pudding. If you produced good work, maybe you say, look, you want to attribute it to an angel, do so. Like, you can tell the difference, or can you, between the work of a madman and the work of a genius? Do you know who deserves institutionalization? Is it if it's a good song, then he gets to walk free? And if he thought he produced something genius and it ended up being really dissonant and really subpar, then clearly this person's off. So we're in a difficult field here, but for sure, once upon a time, there was the fear that if you say these things openly, you can get burnt at the stake. All kinds of things can happen. So mystery schools and mystery cults and initiatory groups, they used to have to, and perhaps still do, signal their status in secrecy. But, I once heard this saying. It was that, I can't remember who said it, but it was, Frank Sinatra cannot sing anonymously. Meaning once you hear it, if you know it, you can't hide it. If you have a radar for divine inspiration, then the divinely inspired can't hide it from you. I mean, they can hide it from somebody, but if you have a radar for it, they can't hide it from you. Just like Frank Sinatra can't sing anonymously. Only for those people who have never heard him before. Well, anyway, let's go back here. So there's this fear. Talking openly about divine inspiration or about these visions or about this madness is sacrilege, so much so that the gift might be taken away in punishment. And boy, wouldn't that be the greatest of all punishments? Here's a clip, Bob Dylan on songwriting. Oh, it's so funny. I think I posted this on my Substack too. Literally, like 15 minutes before he published his. Let's see. I don't know whether you can hear that or not, but you should watch this clip. I have an excerpt from this very clip, I believe, on my Substack post too, which again, I think is pretty remarkable synchronicity. Until I wrote my book, Healing Songs, Ted continues, 20 years ago, I had little interest in these things. I knew about schizophrenia and had even seen it up close. I didn't romanticize it in the least. Of course, I was aware of thinkers who had tried to reframe it. I'm still impressed by R.D. Laing's The Divided Self, an existentialist assessment of schizophrenia. I have mixed feelings about other debunkers of the ruling medical paradigms on the subject, such as Deleuze, Guattari, and Zaz, because they push their small portions of wisdom to untenable extremes. That's probably also true, he continues, of Michel Foucault, but for all his faults and excesses, he at least taught me how easily science can be corrupted by ideology and power. I've also learned a lot about schizophrenia from Ian McGilchrist, who believes that it's linked to certain aspects of our contemporary culture. But I confronted this matter more intensely during my deep research into healing music, where my rationalistic biases were challenged at every step and eventually overcome. My study of shamans and trance experiences forced me to accept the existence of visionary encounters that resist scientific explanation, but cannot be easily dismissed as mental illness. I've gradually come to accept that intensely creative people are very similar to these archaic practitioners of trance and ecstasy. This may seem obvious to many of you, but if, like me, you're a practicing scholar and professional critic, you're discouraged from talking like a raving mystic. You are prodded into embracing a rationalistic and systematic way of viewing everything, even art and creativity. The end result is often ridiculous. I see academics who write about music as if it were a cost accounting or statistics. They refuse to open themselves up to the magical and mystical part of music, which is the source of its greatest power. Okay, let me repeat that because that's kind of nice. Okay, these academics who write about music as if it were cost accounting or statistics, they refuse to open themselves up to the magic and mystical part of music, the magical and mystical part of music, which is the source of its greatest power. Okay, I'm going to interject here very quickly, and I think that you should have a similar conception about philosophy. You should be open to the idea that the greatest philosophy is, I'll soften the blow here, let's call it borderline mystical. That there's a kinship between the magic and mysticism of music and the inspiration of philosophy. And there's a kinship between treating music as accounting and treating philosophy in a loveless, sexless, godless, mechanical way. And that, you're closer to the spirit of music when you don't do that, and you're closer to the spirit of philosophy when you don't do that. So that's a crying shame, he says, when they refuse to open themselves up to the magical and mystical part of music. The whole evolution of music as an academic discipline tends to destroy the most important reason to care about music in the first place. Here's one of my charts on the subject. So let's take a quick look at this chart. I don't want to get into the details and nitpick it, okay? You're going to get a sense of what he's trying to convey, and I think that's going to be helpful here. So you have a movement from the shamanistic to the Orphic to the pre-Socratic to the analytical and philosophical. And you see here, he's treating the philosophical as really distinct from the pre-Socratic, Orphic, and shamanistic. We won't get into the details again of whether or not this is a good or accurate graph. I think there's a lot that we can take issue with here, but let's just take a quick look again. So the cultural values of the shamanistic and Orphic world are music, ritual, myth, and magic, and they have been replaced with philosophy, logic, mathematics, and science. Again, I think this whole model, I don't think is very tenable from the point of view of Platonism, even though Plato shows up on this model as, down here in the bottom right-hand corner, Plato, Aristotle, Iamblichus. So let's spare him a criticism of this particular chart and just go back to his writing, okay? Because I think we could spend some time on this chart, and I don't think everything here would add up quite as neatly as he's mapped it out, but that's okay. That won't detract from the article. So let's continue. That's why I started to write about sleeping, he says. No music writer talks about sleep more than me, and that's because dreams happen when we sleep. And this is the one type of visionary experience everyone can still access. We all become a little unhinged and crazy in those dreams, even the most rationalistic STEM advocate. Here's how George Carlin put it. If you didn't know what sleep was, and you had only seen it in a science fiction movie, you would think it was weird and tell all your friends about the movie you'd seen. I won't give you all the backstory of my obsession with sleep and its connection to creativity. That would take too long. But if you want to get a quick jolt, check out Peter Kingsley's research into the mystical sleep therapies of the ancient world. where mysticism, philosophy, music, and medicine get all jumbled together? Could something like this, dream therapy for creatives, exist in the current day? I've wondered about this for a long time, and I finally decided to ask musicians about whether they had learned their songs from dreams. Nothing prepared me for the response I got, and we'll see what he says about that response. But let me ask you, how many of you have had something like a visionary experience in a dream? By the way, Maimonides 1,000 years ago writes about this, visions in dreams, dream visions, okay, in relationship to degrees of prophecy. But I ask you, how many of you have had some sort of, okay, in some sense, every dream is a vision, right? Because you're seeing something with your eyes closed. Every dream is visionary in some sense. But how many of you have been able to bridge the worlds and take something that you saw or heard or experienced in a dream and translated it out into a waking creation? That maybe directly, maybe in a one-to-one correspondence, maybe there was some seed that was planted that got through to you. You know, the seed was planted in the dream and then the flower blossomed in waking life. Is that a deliberate reference to the movie Waking Life? No, but okay, all of these things are related. So have you had dream visions that became artistic creations or that became insights? Back when I was, I'll spare you, again, I'll spare you as much as possible the personal anecdotes. Okay, we have enough to work with in this piece without me having to involve myself. So he says, nothing prepared me for the response I got. I heard from hundreds of musicians and learned that the gift of a song during a dream is quite common, and it's usually a powerful song. This, of course, is the exact same thing that happens in Native American vision quest or other shamanic initiation experiences, and it's been happening for thousands of years. It happened in ancient Greece, it happened in ancient Egypt, it happened in Siberia, Australia, Africa, and throughout the Americas. You go on a journey in a vision and return with a special song. I'm laughing because it's funny. Some songs that clearly don't fit this mold, it's just funny to think of them as though they were, I'm like, okay, Smells Like Teen Spirit. Not that there's anything wrong with that, okay? Good song, nice album. It's just funny to think of it as, the result of a shamanic special song from a journey on a vision and all that. So if you've studied anthropology or folklore, you may know that already, but what you don't know is how frequently this happens with famous musicians today and results in a huge hit song. By the way, I have to tell you, it's pretty amazing, isn't it? No, this is just the synchronicity. And by the way, there's even possibly a good explanation for the synchronicity, which is that if Ted reads the same music magazines as I read, there was an article in Music Radar, okay, musicradar.com, a few days ago about Paul Simon receiving his call to write a new album in a dream. So I think that's what triggered my desire to write on this topic, and perhaps it triggered Ted's desire to write on it too. So two of Paul McCartney's most successful songs, Yesterday and Let It Be, came to him in dreams. I note that a poll conducted by the BBC to pick the best song of the 20th century put Yesterday in the top spot. So this dream vision song was considered one of the best songs of the 20th century, the best song of the 20th century. Keith Richards got the riff for the Rolling Stones' best-selling song, I Can't Get No Satisfaction, while he was sleeping. Sting's biggest hit, Every Breath You Take, came in a dream. Billy Joel's biggest hit, Just the Way You Are, came in a dream. Carl Perkins' biggest hit, Blue Suede Shoes, came in a dream. Brian Wilson's biggest hit, Good Vibrations, was inspired by phenomena outside of normal sensory human experience. Wilson's mother had spoken of these vibrations and told him that dogs bark at things people can't see. I could give hundreds of other examples. These visions have always shaped our music and always will. In fact, the very first song in the English language, whose composer we know by name, Caedmon's Hymn, from the 7th century, originated in a dream. It would take an entire book to do justice to this subject. In fact, I've addressed it now in 4 of my books, sometimes dealing with it at length. Okay, interesting. If you want to read more on this topic, you should find his books and read them. But even I can't pretend to have done more than scratch the surface of this extraordinary and sadly marginalized aspect of music culture. I want to interject again really quickly. I mentioned to you, one of my favorite songwriters is Noel Gallagher. Okay, Noel Gallagher and Liam Gallagher were the 2 brothers in Oasis. They've just reunited. Their reunion tour has sold out across North America. Okay, but you may know Oasis, Wonderwall, Don't Look Back in Anger. Noel Gallagher is a great songwriter, solo material too. And even though it didn't occur to him in a dream, for instance, he wrote Supersonic, a great song, great rock and roll song on the album Definitely Maybe, in 15 minutes. He said, there's a backstory to it. They were going to record another single, but it wasn't really working out. So the band said, hey, go bang a song out, go write a song. He sits down and it's like a waking dream, okay? out of nowhere, pretty much, comes a fully formed rock and roll masterpiece, supersonic. Even if you don't like Oasis, that's not the point. The point is how something can come to you pretty much, maybe if not in a dream, you didn't have to fall asleep to have it, but in like a trance, or just somehow it just comes to you. That's the amazing thing. That's such an incredible, incredible thing. How does that happen? Most of the things that you want to accomplish, you have to work on. Yes, you can be in the zone. Yes, you can be dialed in. Yes, it can be like automatic writing, but it's still a remarkable thing. So I just wanted to point out, some people have it in a dream, literally. Some people have it, they just channel it. Like Noel just sat down and wrote Supersonic in 15 minutes, and he himself doesn't know how it happened. I note that many musicians have told me, to go back to the article, that they are reluctant to discuss their dream songs. The subject is just too strange and antithetical to our dominant rationalist paradigm. And that reluctance is even greater if the artist has a hallucination or out-of-body experience, or something else that medical experts might want to treat. My hunch is that these happen frequently to intensely creative people, even in an age of rationalism. I'm sure there are people watching this who can relate. I'm sure of it. I don't know the demographics of my viewers. Okay, I don't know, you and I have never met, but I know that there's somebody watching this who has had any version of this experience, an out-of-body experience, a visitation, a vision, an auditory hallucination. Okay, all of these things, I know it. Even though the subject is too strange and antithetical to our dominant rationalist paradigm. Okay, my hunch, though, he says, is that these happen frequently to intensely creative people, even in an age of rationalism. The world isn't as neat and rigorously logical as you've been told, and the world of artistic inspiration is the least logical of all. There's good reason why the ancients believed that creative works were a gift from the muse. That may seem like balderdash to you, and even I try to resist this kind of mysticism, which we don't have to do on this channel because this channel is wide open to it, but not as much as I once did. That's because it's far more plausible than the prevailing scientific theories of creativity. I, he writes, continue to research this subject, and I think about it all the time. Even more important, I try to open my mind up to realms of experience beyond the empirical. That's where creativity comes from, and I don't want to shut myself off from the source because of closed-mindedness. I want to interject again. When I was an undergraduate student, really in love with the idea of mysticism, okay, because before I ever became an academic, I was much more interested in mystical texts. Then I became an academic. I was able to combine that interest in mysticism with the disciplinary structure of academia. Well, one of the papers I wrote, I think it was my first year psychology paper, where I was studying William James and other mystics like Ralph Hood and so on. This phrase about, empiricism, so let me remind you what he said here. He said, even more important, I try to open my mind up to realms of experience beyond the empirical. There's this great notion in William James of the radical, because for a mystic, the mystical experience is empirical. You know what I mean? It's not from the point of view of somebody who does not have a mystical experience, it doesn't seem empirical, it seems transcendental. But for the mystic, it's real because he experienced it. It belongs to his experience. It's empirical. And mystics among themselves can sort of test their experiences. That's the amazing thing too, the commonality among mystics of various traditions. It's kind of like a scientific body of empirical evidence for mysticism, but only understandable by mystics for whom the experience itself is familiar enough that you can categorize it as empirical. So yeah, anyways, there's something like this, I think. I can't remember the exact phrase in William James. I wrote about it. You could find, if you want, I'll post my undergraduate essay online, but that's the basic gist of it, okay? It is empirical for the mystics. That's where creativity comes from, and I don't want to shut myself off from the source because of closed-mindedness. Above all, I don't mock or dismiss artists who have these visions or assume that in every instance they're suffering from mental illness. Some of them might be a lot wiser or healthier than the rest of us. Yeah, great article. Again, not to hitch my wagon to the honest broker's star here, but I want you to know that I wrote something on this topic just shortly before he published this. Again, purely accidental, pure synchronicity. And I think you'd like to read mine too if you read his, even though it's a little bit different. So it's risky to be a visionary. Yes, you risk being called mentally ill. Although, like I said, if you can back it up with work of art, with a great production, with great insight, with great wisdom, with beauty and understanding, then you can give credit, somehow then you can give all the credit to the god or to the muse, to the angel, to the spirit, to the dream world, to your ancestors, whatever you want to give credit to for that great gift. Okay. One of the things I wrote about in my piece that I want to mention here, because I think it's kind of interesting, is that if you do have some sort of moment of inspiration, let's say this is a structural, general kind of problem or situation, characteristic. You receive the gift, a song, line of poetry, an image, an idea, a phrase. You formulate it, and then it looks like it's yours. It looks like Bob Dylan wrote it, or it looks like, Keith Richards wrote it, or Noel Gallagher wrote it. But it came from God knows where, and they themselves say that. It fell from the sky, came from a ghost. The muse gave it to me. Somehow it just appeared. And so it's kind of interesting to me that you want the credit to some extent, or at least you want the royalties. You want the credit, you get the credit, but you give the credit to, you were only part of the picture. I guess you can't give all the credit to God and to the muse because you needed them, but they needed you, right? If a muse has a song that it wants to sing, it needs a singer. So the muse needs the singer, just like the singer needs the muse. It's an amazing thing. It's a truly amazing and beautiful thing. So I really like this topic. Okay. If you followed this channel at all, mysticism is an important pillar of my work and of my school. And I guess the broadest case of that is the visionary artist. For me, the best and most beautiful case of a visionary artist is the philosopher / the political philosopher, the poet philosopher, the prophet legislator. Okay, it's that world where you have this sort of most authoritative insight, understanding, and imagery come together to serve a sort of ruling function, like you do in the philosopher, the legislator, the prophet, and the great new maker of images of existence, to use Nietzsche's phrase. But another extremely interesting component of it is the kind of more narrowly or more purely religious and mystical visionaries, initiates, and madmen. Okay, I think you will find the line in Plato by Socrates that says the greatest thing is madness when it comes as a gift from the gods. There's something to that. But then a subset of all of this that's extremely important is music. For so many reasons, music and madness is a beautiful topic. Music is part of Platonic political philosophy. It's always there in the conversation about education because music forms the soul. You know that. If you're always listening to one certain kind of music, you're going to have one certain kind of soul. There's a direct relationship. There's a reason why when you go into war, you play music that makes you want to fight, or music that is appropriate for marching, appropriate for training. And if you're trying to relax or go to sleep, or if you're trying to have a romantic evening, there's a different sort of music that's appropriate. Okay. Music is intimately related to our mood, to our emotions, to our formation. Okay. Music educates the soul. This is a standard principle in Plato's political philosophy. But there's more to music than the fact that it educates the soul, even though that in and of itself is an incredible thing. There is this phenomenon that Ted, the honest broker, was referring to. Music as a gift from the muses. And it just deserves our full attention. As people who enjoy music, maybe, if you do, and you may not like modern music, you may like classical music, or you may like a combination of both, or who knows, but somehow there's a mystery and a magic to music that deserves our attention independently of its political significance, even though its political significance and its educational significance are also extremely important. Okay, they're extremely important by themselves, and they're extremely important to the authors that we should be taking seriously, people like Plato, Aristotle, Rousseau, Nietzsche, and so on. So that's what I wanted to share with you. Okay. I'll put links to Ted's article, to my article, maybe to some other things that you may find interesting. And yeah, I guess, there are things that I could share with you, but I won't. On a more personal side relating to all of this, but let's just leave it at what we read and what we discussed. And I really would rather hear from you. Do you have this radar for divine inspiration? When you listen to a piece of music, when you see a piece of art, can you just say, imagine you're walking through an art gallery or whatever it is for you. You're flipping through the radio stations or you're listening to your different streams and something jumps out at you. Let's take that art just for the purposes of this example. You're walking through a gallery, you see a work of art, it really just comes alive for you in a way that's completely unexpected and that's unlike everything else around it. When are you tempted to ascribe that to something other than the skill of the artist? When are you able to draw the line between the technical ability and the artistic ability of an artist and that little extra something that we characterize in all these different ways? Madness, mental illness, divine inspiration, the touch of the angel, psychedelic angel tugging at my hand, as Bright Eyes put it. Is it just one of those things where you know it when you see it? Where do you see it in others? Where do you see it in yourselves? Where do you see it in the world? Okay, these are all things that I'd love to hear from you. Really incredible topic. So I hope that you have something about this you can share. And, I guess just to be fair, you don't want, or I don't want in any way to belittle or to dismiss, how could you put it, the destructive forms, not even destructive forms, but like I said, you don't want to say thank God for mental illness and then, go out in some sort of rage and, randomly stabbing strangers and stuff like that. That's not what we mean, obviously. So there also has to be a way of separating between really, mental illness, properly speaking, kind of something that does not make the world more beautiful, more true, more incredible, more holy, everything that you think great art should do when it is a gift of the gods or a gift of the muses. You understand what I'm trying to say? On one hand, you want thank God for mental illness, interpreted it as the great gifts of the muses, not as, the interference of devils into human affairs where suddenly things go very wrong very quickly and God forbid. So what a topic, huh? What a topic. Selling your soul at the crossroads and all the rest of it. So, okay, that's what I wanted to cover with you today. Boy, I'd like to keep going. It's nice to know that Ted has books on that topic. Again, I'll have a link to a Substack. I apologize that I don't know how to pronounce his last name. That's on me. Thanks very much for watching. Like, share, subscribe, comment, stay tuned, and say what you'd like to say. See you in the next video.